And here is the latest on Idalia. Idalia is going to be a hurricane, folks. That's a given. So going forward, I'm just going to use the vocabulary of this is what we think the hurricane is going to do. In fact, the big question is how intense will this hurricane become? You can take it to the bank that it will at least be a 100-mile-per-hour plus hurricane. Might it just barely be a 2 and not a 3? It might. But let's face it, if it's a plus 100-mile-per-hour hurricane, pretty impressive and going to cause a lot of problems for our friends on the Gulf Coast. Not as many for us, but again, keep that in perspective. That as bad as this hurricane is going to be for us, the catastrophic damage, and that's an official vocabulary word that I'm using. It's just not something to come up to be descriptive. Engineers have come up with that terminology, and they can really give you a detailed breakdown that once a hurricane goes from 1 to 2 to 3, and by the way, the damage increases exponentially with each one of those categories, that if it does make landfall as a Category 3, there will be catastrophic damage. This forecast track would bring the eye and therefore the eye wall, the worst the hurricane has to offer, just northwest of Cedar Key. And this may vary just a bit. Now that variation isn't really going to impact our weather much here. Certainly for folks on the Gulf Coast, any wobble of 5 to 10 miles will make a big difference. For instance, anyone within about 20 miles just to the right of landfall, the forecast is for an 11 or 12-foot surge. I wouldn't be surprised if it's up to a 15-foot surge. Not talking about the surf, just the flat Gulf of Mexico waters, 15 feet high. And if you've been out there, as flat as that is, 15 feet is a lot of ocean, Gulf of Mexico water coming in. Of course, the surf is on top of it. But the point I'm making, if you're just 20 miles up the coast where you have winds out of the north, you maybe have a 2-foot surge. So for those folks, 5, 10, 15 miles won't matter that much for us. But remember, the cone of concern shows not where the bad weather is going to be, it's the uncertainty in the forecast. But as we get closer, notice the cone decreases, the uncertainty decreases. In fact, now that we're within 36 hours of landfall, the average error is only about 40 miles. So there will be some variation in our forecast, but we're getting to the point now, at least for those of us in northeast Florida and southeastern Georgia, where we can determine, I think, give you a pretty good forecast as far as both timing and as far as what to expect. This is the last official forecast, most recent. We'll have it updated. Hurricanes, of course, weaken as they go inland. I hesitate to use the term weaken. I should probably say it's not going to be as intense as the eye, and I do think there will still be a presentable eye and eye wall when it goes right over you folks over the Lake City, Live Oak area, then maybe over Patterson, Georgia, and then to Savannah by about sunset, and then on off to the northeast. So that's the official track. As far as all the watches and warnings, remember, a warning means prepare for it. It's going to happen. A watch means watch for the possibility. I mention that because for those of you, generally speaking, west of Highway 301, it's a hurricane watch. So you're watching for the possibility of hurricane conditions. We'll break it down for you county by county as far as who we think will actually have hurricane conditions. And then the yellow, which is for where 90% of us live, the Jacksonville metropolitan area. We call it the coastal counties. Even for Clay and Putnam, although you're not on the ocean, you're on the St. Johns River, and of course that flows into the ocean. So if the ocean comes up, the St. Johns as well. So all of the coastal counties under a tropical storm watch. Now, might that eventually be upgraded to a hurricane watch? It might, but it does show that even if those of us in the coastal counties end up going to a hurricane warning, it's going to be on the fringes of being a hurricane. Again, it's going to be rough, but certainly that's a lot better than the Category 3. So what am I showing you here? Well, there's the hurricane force winds, then there's the tropical storm force winds. Think of those as the gale force winds. And what are these damaging winds? That's 50 knots. What's 50 knots? Well, when we put out a severe thunderstorm warning, remember, a severe thunderstorm warning isn't issued because of the lightning or the intensity of the rain. It's issued because the winds are at 50 knots, 58 miles per hour. Why is that a big deal? Because engineers determined decades ago that once winds get up to about 58, 60 miles per hour, that's when we begin to have some damage. That's when tree limbs start to come down. We start to have power outages. So again, I like this graphic because it helps point out for those of us that maybe won't feel the impact of the eye wall, still the damaging winds, at least in isolated areas, will impact large areas of the Jacksonville metropolitan area as it heads off to the northeast and then loses its intensity. Here's another way to look at it. This is just one particular model. We've talked about it through the decades, really, that even if you're not looking at all the numbers, look for symmetry. If you see a hurricane looking pretty darn symmetrical, and this is Tuesday, 7 p.m., so here's Tampa, it's looking pretty symmetrical. And the more symmetrical these look, the more intense the hurricanes are. Look at that. I mean, that's almost like the classic symbol, unfortunately. And this is, well, it's a graphical presentation of this computer model forecasting a Category 3, a major hurricane. Now, for those of you new to hurricane country, remember there's 5 categories, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But really, once you get to 3, then it really is like the movies. And I mean in the dramatic, catastrophic way. That's why we say once it gets to 3, 4, and 5, it is a major hurricane. But it needs the octane, it needs the warm waters. We've talked about the fact Gulf of Mexico waters around the world for that matter are at record levels. The warmer the water, think of heat as potential energy. And there's just a lot of potential energy that will be drawn in toward this hurricane. And then you can watch it spiral up to the northeast. Notice by Wednesday afternoon, you don't see the eye. And that's because the system will be weakening. Notice also, one more point I want to make here. So notice the track goes about like this. The heaviest rainfall totals don't look like they're going to be to the right. Sometimes that's assumed that's going to happen for a lot of reasons. I won't get into it now. The heaviest rainfall totals are actually going to be under the eye wall and to its left side. And so that's why, although for many of us in the Jacksonville metropolitan area, we will have downpours, but I'm not expecting widespread flooding. So here we go. Columbia, Baker, Bradford, Union County, especially Lake City and Columbia County, you're going to have Cat 1 conditions, which could also mean gusts to 85. And engineers have determined to add a Category 1, plan on roof damage and large branches down, which is why for those of you especially that will feel the impact of the eye wall, even though it's not as strong as when it makes landfall, not only will you have power outages, you probably will be without power for days. For the rest of us, it probably won't be days. It most likely will be more in the form of hours. But next in line as far as the most widespread wind damage and heavy rains will be for those of you as the core of the hurricane, then tropical storm, heads to the northeast. Think towns like Waycross and Patterson, but all of these counties really, Ware, Charlton, Brantley, and Pierce. These are the conditions you should plan on. Okay, we're going to wrap it up. So here's the big 3. And we'll continue to do this as we go right on through Wednesday night and Thursday morning. So the hurricane is heading our way. It will impact us. Our stormiest day will be Wednesday. Think dawn to dusk. Category 1 conditions for those of you in Lake City, but even for those of us who are not under the eye wall, there will be power outages, and we'll have some isolated tornadoes. And of course, we will keep you updated through this now hurricane heading to the north and northeast, that is heading toward our area.